welcome to another episode of I Am Nano.
Putting the I in I Am Nano, I am your host, Irfani.
And putting the M, I am your other host, Monica.
It's a beautiful day today. It's like hot and humid and wonderful. Summer is here. But one thing I really dislike about the summer are the bugs, the spiders, and all those creatures that come out of hibernating after the winter.
Oh my goodness, yes, mosquitoes are not my friends at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And this year, all the cicadas are coming out too. And those creatures are so funny. They come out every 17 years just for mating. Interesting life cycle for sure, but also very noisy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know. It gets really annoying. But you know what? These creatures that we see are actually some of the most interesting and marvelous creatures in the world. And today, we're going to be talking about gecko-inspired adhesion micropillars.
Awesome. Are we learning about designing gecko-inspired nano adhesives?
That's true. So, Leo and colleagues from the Institute of Technological Science in Wuhan University developed T-shaped micropillars made of polydimethylsiloxane, also known as PDMS, infused with calcium carbonate nanoparticles to make T-shaped microfillers inspired by the adhesive foot hairs of gecko and tree frogs. Now, just like dogs and cats' toes, these geckos and frogs' adhesive foot hairs are very soft and squishy, but unlike the dogs and cats' toes, they are adhesive, allowing them to defy gravity so they can walk on walls.
Amazing. And it's funny, we don't see cats and dogs walking on walls for sure. Maybe
Mhm.
one day we'll have Spider Pig, from the Simpsons movie back in the But scientists observed in 2002, actually, that the reason why geckos can stick on walls is because of these molecular forces called van der Waals forces. Those are forces between molecules, usually very weak when we look at them individually, but they can stack together and become very, very strong, strong
Mhm.
enough for some animals to walk on walls. Generally, materials with a small elastic modulus are required for the formation of reliable contact between the material and the surface.
Okay, so first let's clarify what elastic modulus is. Now, it's a term that measures the stiffness of a material. The more squishy a material is, the lower its elastic modulus. Now, although materials that have small elastic modulus can help to promote these adhesion, it's actually found that some insects have setae or the adhesive feet that are flexible at the tip and more stiff at the root. So there's this gradient of stiffness that enhances adhesion and promote high structural stability. And that exactly is what Liu and colleagues achieved to do.
So the microfillers are made of PDMS, as you mentioned. PDMS is quite a common flexible material used in laboratories since their applications are endless. They are sticky and can adhere to surfaces quite well. And so PDMS is used as the baseline material, and then the researchers added calcium carbonate nanoparticles to make the PDMS more stiff in some areas. To create this gradient of stiffness, after the calcium carbonate nanoparticles are mixed in the PDMS and added into the mold, the researchers placed the mold in a centrifuge to help concentrate the nanoparticles to the bottom of the mold. The centrifugal force was fine-tuned until they achieved the desired gradient.
Okay, so let's revisit that word again, centrifuge. Now, what is that? It is a force that acts on an object when viewed from a rotating frame of reference. Now, I think a good example of this would be, that circular roundabout equipment in the playground that rotates around. So, say you and your friends are on it, and then someone runs around to make it spin faster and faster, and then you feel yourself forced on the railings. Now, that's what essentially a centrifugal force is. Although in this case, the nanoparticles are forced to move instead of you.
Oh, yes, very interesting analogy. Yes, yes, that's exactly it. So, what the researchers observed was that with 3,000 rotations per minute, RPM, for 5 minutes, and then 3,500 RPM for 10 minutes, they could create a gradient of stiffness along the PDMS. The more calcium carbonate nanoparticles are present in the PDMS, the stiffer it became. After the PDMS was cured or baked, another layer of PDMS was printed on top to form T-shaped micropillars. So these micropillars are relatively stiffer at the tip below the thin PDMS layer and then more flexible at the root.
Now, to evaluate whether or not these calcium carbonate nanoparticles, PDMS infused gradient micropillars, act like those gecko feet, they pressed it against a spherical ruby with a specified loading force, how much you force it on the surface, and then the force that's required to separate it from the surface, which is referred to as the pull-off force, is eventually then measured. Compared to the PDMS micropillars that didn't have any calcium carbonate nanoparticles, and compared to the ones with calcium carbonate nanoparticles but wasn't centrifuged, these gradient micropillars required a much higher pull-off force as the loading force increased. So this tells us that the presence of this stiffness gradient caused by the calcium carbonate nanoparticles enhanced the adhesion between the surface and the material. And it can also form good contact when placed on an angled surface because you know what? These geckos can be crawling on the nooks and crannies of our walls.
Oh, yes, I don't want to randomly wake up to that scenery surrounded by crawling wall geckos in all the corners. As cute as geckos are, don't really want to see that.
Well, you know what? It happened to me before when I was, whenever I visit Indonesia.
Oh
There's
my
quite a bit of
goodness.
them there.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I can imagine. Well, at least now we know why they can stand on the
Hmm.
walls. So
Hmm.
that's good. So this stiffness gradient is definitely important to create strong adhesion to surfaces. It is believed that the gradient helps to regulate the distribution of stress, with most of the stress concentrated in the center. This also helps to create this suction effect at the outer edges of the contact area.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And these micropillars also increased the friction forces such that more force is required to bend the micropillars that have the stiffness gradient when it's pulled horizontally.
Very interesting. And so now that we've learned this, can we implement it onto the pads of our toes and fingers so we can scale walls and say, make Spider-Man a reality? Or maybe Spider-Pig finally?
Oh, yeah, maybe we can. But I guess in some sports that may be kind of like cheating for sports, say like wall climbing, because I think they need to coat their palms with chalk, right, to help them grip onto the handles. Maybe in the future, they will coat their hands with these calcium carbonate enhanced gradient PDMS. But that might be a little messy. So I think we'll have to design it a little differently. All right, everyone. That is all the Nano for today. Take care.
Stay curious.